Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Fazio and I'm from the OSRL Subsea Well Intervention Services, or SWIS, and thanks for joining us today on our third of our OSRL Subsea Well Intervention Services webinars to take a closer look at the sea response vessel tracking software and analysis software available to OSRL's subscribers. So today we'll be joined by the developers of the software, Maritech, to take us through its operation and give us an overview of the upcoming software enhancements. But first, let's meet the presenters for today. Chris Lund. So Chris is our OSRL SWIS Subsea Project Engineering Manager. Chris is based in the UK. Chris has been working with Maritech and our subscribers' technical advisory forum or staff in the sea response platform development and the upgrades. Our next presenter is Paul Love. Paul works for Clarksons Plc. Paul's based in Scotland. He's a career shipbroker with over 25 years of experience. Clarksons Plc is the world's largest shipbroker and is responsible for chartering and deployment of technology in offshore renewables globally. Our next presenter is Tilly Manley. Tilly is based in Clarksons Plateau in Asia, Singapore office. She's the broker for Subsea. And last but not least, we have Colin Young, who's an associate with Maritech based in Aberdeen. And Colin is a dedicated data analyst for sea response, whilst also being responsible for sales in the Maritech offshore division. The topics that we're going to cover off today, I'll briefly go over the Global Subsea Response Network, the OSRL GSRN, and I'll talk a little bit about how that works and how that facilitates with some of the discussions that we're having today, or facilitates support for some of the discussions that we're having today. I'll talk a little bit about source control emergency response planning. We'll look at the use of the sea response platform for emergency response planning, and then Paul will take us into the Maritech, Clarksons Plateau and OSRL partnership, and then look at the participation in the Global Subsea Response Network and how that works for Clarksons and Maritech. We'll look at the sea response software and its new features, or newest features, have a look at a capping stack mission, look at the APAC vessel market, and then we'll go into Q&A at the end. So with the Q&A, please post your questions utilising the little icon, the question mark icon on the right-hand side of your screen near the leave button. Please don't press the leave button, otherwise you will leave the webinar. Post the questions as we go along throughout the presentations, and at the end of the session today, at the end of the presentations, I will then ask the presenters your questions so that they can provide a response to you. So as we go along, please post those questions up. You may not see those questions come live. I'll be able to see them here, and then at the end we'll get to them and answer them. So I'd like to just quickly talk about the Global Subsea Response Network and just a little bit about how that works. So a comprehensive planning is required to prepare for the unlikely event of a loss of well control incident. And we know that no one company alone can provide a comprehensive end-to-end solution for a response with regard to services, equipment and trained personnel. And so through the OSRL Global Subsea Response Network, our SWIS members can utilise the collective expertise of the network's partners to develop source control emergency response plans and support a comprehensive response effort. So the next slide here talks about or demonstrates who our Global Subsea Response Network partners are, and you can see they come from a variety of different organisations with different specialisations, and obviously Sea Response and Clarksons Maritech are in there as well. I'd like to touch on source control emergency response planning just briefly, and OSRL preparedness activities consist of services for surface and subsea response. And OSRL's preparedness services for surface response also include OPEP development, spill modelling and capability reviews, tactical response plans and training and exercises. From the subsea side of things, subsea response planning services are aligned with the provisions of IOGP Report 594, which is guidance on how to develop a source control emergency response plan, or a SCRP. And through the Global Subsea Response Network, OSRL can provide an integrated planning approach to support our members to develop their SCRPs, or their source control emergency response plans, that align with global best practice and local regulatory requirements as well. Just a quick overview on how Sea Response software is accessed. And so that's through our OSRL capping subscription. So the subscribers to the capping system have access to the Sea Response software. The Sea Response software provides access to real-time vessel location and tracking, and it should be used to support the preparedness phase of developing your source control emergency response plan, to understand what types of vessel you might you may require to undertake specific missions. And the software then can be utilised in a response as well to locate specific vessels for those particular missions on the day. So from here, I think I'm going to hand over to Paul Love from Clarksons to discuss the relationship between OSRL and Clarksons. So over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you for the introductions and for hosting today's webinar about Sea Response. To our guests on the webinar today, we have 10 slides to share. They will be complete in about 30 minutes time and include 5 short demonstrations of key functionalities that are unique to Sea Response. But I thought it would be helpful to give and to share a little bit of the background of how Clarksons and OSRL have worked together since 2017. We've been developing software with OSRL's help for the industry, which has all been about speeding response and improving preparedness. And Swiss members benefit from the fact that Clarksons Plateau is a member of the OSRL managed Global Subsea Response Network. And as Mario said, that's a strategic alliance that provides execution support and preparedness, or at least that's Clarksons Plateau's roles in that. But I'd like to take you through the differences between the Clarksons roles within that network. So Clarksons Plateau is about execution and preparedness. That company is staffed with 80 staff, 80 shipbrokers in 10 offices. Those brokers understand the technical challenges of mobilizing a stack with current vessel setups because they're trading in those markets every day and working with those vessels on a daily basis. That knowledge might help with the release of construction vessels, for example, from their current contracts. And Maritech is about marine technology, normally about end-to-end solutions, research, intelligence, monitoring applications. So about applications that you can use on the internet. They provide really high uptime with a global support team and developers that help build new features for our applications that our customers are asking for, some of which we're going to be demonstrating today. Maritech, though, are also contracted for drill support and they provide training especially. We really encourage anyone on this webinar who's a subscriber to Sea Response to keep training with the system, keep using it, and really lean into the support that Maritech provides just to get your well set up and that you're ready in the event of an exercise or an event. Anyway, and to move on, I'd like to give a summary of the main features of Sea Response before we demonstrate them to you. Next slide, please, Mario. So perhaps some in the audience are challenged with preparedness or demonstrating a capability in a response or in an exercise. Sea Response has evolved through the years, but it's always been about, as I said, speed and accuracy. So it's about sifting through vessels quickly. And we've digitalized that task. And in our case, we parse 98,000 vessels and 67 different vessel types that are always moving. We're proud of the accuracy of the system to the extent that we even correct positioning data that we receive from ships. And we have analysts that are always checking vessel specifications and critical equipment that are fitted to construction support vessels that help speed a response. And we were able to do this with OSRL's help, as Mario mentioned earlier, led by Chris Lund and the Swiss staff work group that he led. We resolved all of these tasks into 26 pre-built missions, and we took into consideration, as I think Chris will say, the vessel criteria that came from the capping and containment guidelines. We broke them down into 5 groups: capping, containment, the offset installation equipment missions, that's moving the OIE out of Trieste and deploying her, relief well drilling, and for multiple surface responses. But before we demonstrate them, I'd like to hand over to Chris to discuss why we use Sea Response and where it delivers most value. Next slide, please, Mario.
With the 11th-year anniversary of the Macondo incident in the Gulf of Mexico just 2 days ago, the oil and gas industry capability to respond to a major well control incident subsea have come a long way. With the IOGP 594, a guidance to source control emergency response planning, and the IOGP 592, the response time modeling document, complements the OSRL capping and containment guidelines. And the OSRL hardware, whether it be the capping stacks, the subsea incident response toolkit, containment hardware, and the offset installation system stored at strategic locations globally. These are all key components enabling the industry to respond efficiently in the unlikely event of a subsea well control incident with the release of hydrocarbons to environment. Understanding the vessel of opportunity availability is a critical task in a response time model. Whether this is understanding the vessel market, vessel capabilities, or transit times from mobilization point to incident site is all key data input to understand the critical path in a response plan. Sea Response was developed to aid the industry with access to this information in a fast, efficient, and a verified way to identify, verify, and monitor vessels of opportunity required to build the various mission plans, which Paul mentioned previously, in the response time model and in the source control plan. And as with all response plans, this should be exercised regularly. I'd like now to hand over to Colin Young from Maritech to demonstrate the software platform for us. Colin, stage is yours. Mario, next please, slide please, and thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So yeah, I'm just going to give you, this is one of 5 demos today. So the first is going to cover some sort of main functionality on Sea Response. So Mario, whenever you're ready, hit play, please. So this is Sea Response that you can see on the screen here. It's our emergency response planning tool, which basically enables users to find vessels of opportunity in an emergency scenario and find them quickly. So over here on the left-hand side here, you can see it says mission selection. So these are the 26 pre-configured missions that Paul discussed earlier. So 11 capping missions, 6 containment missions, 5 missions pertaining to the OIE in Trieste, as well as 1 relief well drilling mission and 3 surface response missions. As well as those pre-configured missions, we do have a create mission function. So you can hit create mission and then select your mission filters. There's a couple of different mission identifiers you can choose from. So crane capacity, current crane wire length, as well as the vessel having an ROV on board. And then you can manipulate these sliders to alter those mission parameters. So I think in this instance, I've selected 250 tons up to 5,000 tons for the crane capacity, and a minimum crane wire length of 1,000 meters. We can also search for vessels via name or IMO. So we're looking at the MV Pride on the screen there. You can see she's highlighted by that yellow arrow, and she's actually situated just off Singapore at the moment. You can click on that vessel and view some further vessel details on that ship, and we're going to come back to that ship later on in our response. So users can also input the coordinates of a well location, for example, and we can also pin the OSRL equipment and base locations to the map. You can actually see them appearing on the map there with the oil spill response droplet, oil droplet logo there. With those locations pinned to the map, we can actually begin to interact with those locations and set them as waypoints and include them in our route planning. So if we look here, we can see that that's the OSRL Mackay base, and that's the location of the 15K PSI Rio capping stack. We can also save missions that we run and bring them back up to the screen and run them concurrently anytime we like. So this is a North Sea capping stack mission that we've run in the past. And then there's also a Gulf of Mexico capping stack mission, just to give you a sort of clear idea of what Sea Response looks like. And at this stage, I'm going to hand back to Paul.
Thanks, Colin. And if I were to summarize that, I would say it's obviously all about speed and being ready by being pre-configured. there was the 5 groups of missions, but critically overlaid with OSRL locations for their equipment, because it often makes sense to select local vessels, i.e. local to OSRL equipment bases, as opposed to vessels that are necessarily closer to the area where the incident might be. Colin demonstrated a selectable search area, and that's really important because it helps you focus on vessels depending on the market that you're searching for vessels in. For example, he demonstrated the North Sea and the US Gulf, both areas where there are a lot of construction support vessels, but there might be other areas, particularly around Australia, where you might have to look further afield. Other features like building bespoke missions, dropping pins like Google Earth to react anywhere in the planet instantly, or searching for vessels by name, all add up to an easy but professional application for emergency response. Next up, how we use the software to develop mission plans and to track vessels that we might rely upon in the APAC region. So back to you, Colin.
So yeah, in this demo, I'm going to talk you through creating missions and fleets. So we can save well locations by inputting the coordinates of those wells, or as Paul mentioned, we can actually just drop a pin somewhere on the globe. So in this instance, off the coast of Northwest Australia, and then input the name for that well, so Acme well, and then input information such as water depth, and then decide who within our organization we'd like to share that well location with. With that well location saved, we can then search for that well at a later date. And we can actually begin running a mission by selecting the Singapore capping stack base as our location, and you can see that blue response radius appear on the screen. As Paul mentioned, we can increase and decrease the size of that radius up to 5,000 nautical miles to give you a more global picture, or we can actually input an exact number such as 2,000 nautical miles around Singapore. From there, we select one of our missions. So in this instance, we're looking for capping stack installation vessels. And it may be difficult to see, but we're now resolving 10 capping stack vessels based on the parameters outlined in that mission on the left-hand side there. We can alter these parameters, so we're removing types and subtypes here. And we can also, for example, increase the upper limit of that crane capacity there up to 10,000 tons. And there will be more green arrows indicating ships appearing within that response radius. And actually our vessel counter has increased on the bottom there to resolve 16 vessels now. We can then save this mission. So we're saving this as APAC capping stack. And then similar to what I showed you before, we can bring up the two other capping stack missions that we ran and have those all running on screen at the same time. If we head to the grid view now, we have a sort of data overview of the ships that are involved in those 3 missions, and we can skip between those 3 tabs and sort vessels by duration, for example, look at ownership, as well as a few other things. So we head back to the APAC capping stack mission. We can also add these vessels to a fleet. So we've selected all of those vessels at this stage, and I'm going to hand to Paul quickly now to summarize.
Thanks, Colin. From a user's perspective, as you demonstrated, potentially useful vessels are being resolved by running a mission criteria. In this case, it was the pre-built capping stack mission. And then the mission was tweaked, and you could see that he was able to move quickly to understand the numbers and changing numbers of vessels that would likely be available to be chartered in the event of a response. And then his ability to move that into a fleet which he is able to share with other users of the system is potentially very useful. Back to you, Colin.
Thanks, Paul. So at this stage, I have selected all of those vessels in the grid view in that APAC capping stack mission. And what I can actually begin to do now is select which vessels I'm most interested in and then add them to a fleet. The demo may have frozen here, hold on. But anyway, we can select any of those vessels which we're interested in, and then, for example, in this instance, we would select vessels such as the Pride, which we know is on location in Singapore, as well as vessels like the Deep Orient and the Sapura Constructor. That's it. The demo was caught up now, so you can see that I am removing vessels that we're less interested in, given their contractual status or where they are currently. And then from there, we can actually add them to a fleet. So back to you, Paul, briefly.
Thanks. And though Tilly is about to explain availability, the feature that Colin just demonstrated, where the system can focus on planned vessels of opportunity, because the system allows you to deselect vessels and then share them into a privately monitored fleet. That helps with pre-planning, because vessel users might want to rely on particular ships. And that could be the case because some vessels that our system resolved might not be crewed, they might be in a dry dock, they might be laid up, or perhaps don't have safety cases, for example. Anyway, it's an important new feature to Sea Response that we think greatly enhances preparedness with monitoring. Back to you, Colin.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so at this stage, with these 3 vessels selected, we can then move towards adding them to a fleet. So we would simply, on the top right, there's a button that says Add to Fleet or Save as Fleet, and then you can add to an existing fleet or create a brand new fleet. So in this instance, we would create a new fleet, and then save that as something relevant, such as in this instance, Acme Energy Emergency Response Fleet, and then we have those 3 vessels to hand in a fleet, which we can share with other users within our organization. And that's it for the second demo. So I'm going to hand over to Tilly, who's going to talk to us about vessels of availability in the APAC region.
Thanks, Colin. So I'm going to go over the APAC vessel market as of this week and show you how we would go about narrowing down our vessel search to the best candidates based on today's market. So as Colin just showed in his demo, we use the Sea Response software in the exact same way to narrow down vessels within a 2,000 nautical mile radius of the OSRL capping stack storage location in Singapore, using a number of criteria such as vessel type, crane capacity and deck space. And from there, we were able to look at 16 vessels. So out of the 16 vessels, we know that 2 have been facing some technical issues and are currently undergoing maintenance. So taking them out of the options, we can then look at the remaining 14 vessels. And from there, we had to check their back deck configurations and any project commitments that they might have going on. 10 were known to be involved in pipelay projects or had projects ongoing with several large or complex pieces of equipment or containers on the deck. So from there, as this is also going to be a well site in Australian waters, we were able to concentrate on vessels with Australian safety cases, and that left us with a focus group of 3. Just want to say that it's likely in this scenario to take an average of 48 hours for a vessel to come alongside at the OSRL base in Singapore. However, that's slightly above average, as typically we normally see CSVs closer to Singapore. However, we have been seeing an uptick in activity this month, so that's left a majority of suitable vessels a bit further away than they usually would be. So from there, we can look more closely at the 3 remaining vessels. Next slide, please, Mario. Okay, so after narrowing down our options, we are left with the 3 most suitable candidates, which in this case is the MV Pride, the Deep Orient, and the Sapura Constructor. So the MV Pride, she's currently on a short project in Malaysia. She's fully manned with a 250-ton AHC crane, 2 work-class ROVs already on board. Her deck has a few empty flowline reels on it, but these would be easily able to be removed in Singapore, and she would be able to take a capping stack rather quickly. So she's due to complete her work in Malaysia in early May. However, we do believe she would be able to be released at relatively short notice to set sail from Singapore in an emergency situation. The vessel also has planned work in Australia later this year, and she's also just obtained a safety case. So in this situation, it would take her around a day and a half for her to arrive in Singapore from her current location if she sailed at her max speed of 16 knots. The Deep Orient is currently in Singapore and would assume to be the best option as she is nearest, but she is undergoing engine maintenance, which may leave her unable to sail out in event of an emergency at short notice. So she does have a project commitment in Australia coming up and will be sailing there at the end of May. She has an Australian safety case, a 250-ton crane, and 2 work-class ROVs on board as well. The sail time will just be dependent on how far along the engine maintenance is at the time of activation. But if it would be possible for her to sail, she will be the closest option to the location with a sail time of about 1 hour at her max speed of 15 knots. The Sapura Constructor has recently sailed from Singapore to Thailand to mobilise for a saturation diving programme, where she'll be working until the first week of May. She'll be then heading to Malaysia for another project. Again, we believe that she'll be able to be released at relatively short notice from these projects and set sail from Singapore in an emergency situation. She also has an Australian safety case, a 250-ton AHC crane, and 2 work-class ROVs, and she could reach Singapore in roughly 2 days. I'm now going to hand back over to Colin for another demonstration.
Thank you, Tilly. So in the next demonstration, I am going to talk you through the routing function that Sea Response, or that's integral to Sea Response. So Mario, please hit play whenever you're ready. So on the left-hand side here, you can see a number of the fleets that I have saved on my Sea Response, as well as the Acme Energy Emergency Response fleet that we created with those 3 vessels of opportunity earlier. We can actually, if we zoom in, we can see those vessels on the map there. So that's the Deep Orient, as Tilly mentioned, close by in Port in Singapore, the Sapura Constructor, as well as the MV Pride, which we're going to focus on. So if we click on the button that says distance from here, we can then begin to search for locations such as the location of that capping stack in Singapore. And then we can also search for the Acme well, which we created and saved earlier. So from there, instantly you'll begin to see the routing appear on the screen, going from the current location of the Pride down to Singapore and then down to the well site. Now over here on the right hand side, you can see that this vessel is traveling at 17.5 knots, and thus the duration is figured out from that speed. Now that speed is the max recorded speed we have of that vessel traveling from AIS data, but we can actually amend that to something a bit more realistic, like 16 knots in this case. We can then input a stopgap. So in this instance, 72 hours for the mobilization of that capping stack in Port in Singapore, and the duration has updated based on that addition of those of that mobilization. So we're looking at 8 days, 16 hours now. We can then click calculate for all vessels, and Sea Response will do that math on that same routing for those 3 vessels from their current location. If we move to the grid view, again, we can see the data on these 3 ships in our fleet, and we can actually sort by duration. So we can quickly see that indeed the Deep Orient will be the quickest to respond, but we can also garner some more clues on what those vessels are doing based on their AIS navigation status. So you can see moored, restricted maneuverability, and the third is underway using her engine. We've also got some more technical specs along the right-hand side of the grid view, such as the vessel's gear summary, the vessel's ownership, the vessel's length, breadth, draft, deck area, as well as other various technical specs on the vessel. We can actually click on a vessel to find out more on the vessel, such as her identification, so her IMO, her name, the ownership details of that vessel, more information on her classification, as well as more technical specifics such as deck area, and then lifting capacities as well, which we can actually open up and view some more info there. So all of this information in the equipment section is checked by the two sea response data analysts. So you can see here on the left hand side we have two work class ROVs which are currently on board the Pride. So both models are Triton XLSs. They both have a max depth rating of 3,000 meters, and both have a current umbilical length of 3,000 meters and a current tether length of 500 meters. Then over on the right hand side you can see we have the offshore crane. So it's a knuckle boom crane. It's active heave compensated with a capacity of 250 tons with a current crane wire length of 2,400 meters. We can then click on the positions tab to quickly figure out exactly where that vessel is on the globe at the moment. And that's it for demo 3. So I'm going to hand back to Paul at this stage.
Thanks, Colin. I think you really elegantly demonstrated the route planning via a capping stack storage location and showed off that we're tracking the equipment levels aboard the vessels. This component is perhaps the most important because it has revealed the best configured vessel that is also fastest to the field. And given that the vessels are always moving and some are unavailable and have different maximum sailing speeds and varying levels of pre-fitted critical equipment, it's a reasonably complex problem. But Sea Response solves that and also gives users valuable input into, as Chris mentioned earlier, the response time model and the development of that many of our users maintain. But moving on now, if we may, to the newest features of Sea Response, which roll out next week. Next slide, please, Mario, and over to you, Colin.
Thanks. So in this demo, just hit play, Mario, whenever you're ready. So in this demo, I'm going to talk to you about a new feature coming to Sea Response next week, which is the geofencing and alerting feature. So over on the left-hand side, you can see the fleet that we created earlier, the Acme Energy Emergency Response Fleet. And we can click on that fleet and bring up those 3 vessels to the map. So once again, the Sapura Constructor, the Deep Orient, and the MV Pride. So from there, we can click the geofence button, which then enables the user to draw a polygon around a specific location on the globe. So in this instance, we're interested in vessel activity in and around Singapore. So we create a polygon around there and save that polygon as Singapore geofence. From there, there's a couple of things that we can do, such as toggle this geofence on and off to the map, as well as edit that geofence. So we can actually increase the vertices or decrease them, as well as just generally amending the shape. We can also pick up that geofence and move it if we decide to. And then from there, we can begin to create notifications, which is where the value really lies in this feature. So there are no notifications configured for the moment for this geofence. I simply add a notification and then associate that notification to a geofence. So we can create notifications based on those 3 vessels in that fleet, based on whether they enter or leave that polygon that we created. And then we create a name for that notification. So Singapore Capping Stack Vessel Alerts. And then we save that notification. And then anytime any 3 of those Capping Stack vessels enter or leave that geofence, we are notified via email. And that's it for demo 4. I think we are going to jump straight into our final demo. Mario, if you could change the slide and just hit play when you're ready on demo 5. Thank you. So this is another new feature. So this is our ETA enhancements and weather feature, which is coming to Sea Response version 3 soon. So this is an early prototype. As you can see here, we've got a mission running in the North Sea with just a fictitious routing, which is running over to Greenland, just so that we can show you some of the bad weather that vessel might encounter along the way. So I've clicked the weather button and you can see that our routing has updated with a number of different colors. So green indicating fairer weather. And as we move toward yellow and orange, we are encountering some slightly worse weather. So we have 5 different categories of weather, ranging from a category 1, which is a gentle breeze, up to category 5, which is hurricane force. So you can see the vessel, based on its current speed and routing, is actually encountering fairly decent weather along the way, but we can actually alter the vessel's speed to slow that speed down in order to see the map update with some slightly different weather. So I think if we alter that vessel speed down to around 2 knots, just again to just show you the feature, we'll actually begin to see that the vessel in this instance, as she reaches the sort of coast of Greenland, she's actually going to encounter some quite rough weather. So Sea Response is just figuring that out at the moment, and you can see there's a lot of tooltips which have showed up off the coast of Greenland, and each of these tooltips indicate a different weather form. So you can see here the line is turned purple, indicating category 4 weather, which is strong and severe gales in this instance. We do also have a further weather overlay feature coming to Sea Response, whereby you'll be able to sort of visualize sea swell and wind on the map as an overlay. And that's it from me. That's it for the demos of Sea Response. It's back to you, Mario, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Appreciate that. Well, before we get into the Q&A, and please start posting your Q&A now. We're nearly at the end of the session, so we'd like to sort of answer as many questions as we can. But before I get into the Q&A, I thought we should take some time to look at our contact information. If you have any questions or require any preparedness support, please do not hesitate to contact myself or Chris Lund from OSRL Swiss in the first instance. I've also listed the contact details of the Clarksons and Maritech team if you have any vessel charter related questions or software questions that we haven't been able to answer after the presentation. So with no further ado, let's get into the Q&A. So perhaps, Paul, this might be a question for you. I'll just put you up on the screen there. Does the Sea Response software have an actual contractual availability of vessels? Can it provide that information, Paul?
So, Mario, I think that question asks whether or not Sea Response displays if a vessel is currently on contract to another charter, and the answer is no. The reason that it doesn't do that is that we anticipate, in the event of an emergency, that the incident owner would negotiate the release of that vessel from wherever she happens to be, from whichever charterer has the vessel on hire, back to the owner for contracting to the incident owner. So it was decided that we didn't need to track the commercial availability of ships because Sea Response is all about vessels of opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. There's another question here. I'm not sure who this is for. How long does it take to contract a vessel to undertake like a capping stack mission or an OIE mission, for example? Would that be you or Tilly?
Let's hand that one off to Tilly, just because this presentation was sort of centered on the APAC region and she's a subsea broker in Singapore. So Tilly, you comfortable with that one?
Yeah, sure. I lost you a bit, Mario, during that question. Do you mind repeating it one more time?
Sure. How long does it take to contract a vessel to undertake a capping stack mission or an OIE mission? So what are the timeframes?
Right. Obviously, we will be dependent on which vessel, what the vessel's doing at the time as well. But basically, on our experience, the fastest way to do that would be to use an industry standard contract, that such as a BIMCO sort of format that an owner's familiar with. That would be the fastest way, and they obviously have to get approval to sail off if they're in the middle of a project, which we do foresee that would be acceptable if it was an emergency situation. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'd also like to add, if I may, Mario, we quite often participate in exercises where we try and simulate that length of time. typically contracting construction support vessel in peacetime on an industry standard contract like a BIMCO Supply Time 2017 could be done in 2 or 3 hours. We suspect that there will be more hoops to jump through, more insurance questions, and we typically aim to get that chartering process done within about 9 hours.
Yep, agree.
Thanks, Paul. Another question, is sea response service, is it upon request, or is it already included as one package when OSRL notified to mobilise capping stack? I can answer that, but maybe Chris, do you want to have a go at that question?
Sure. I'm not sure if I fully understood the question though. Sea response is a part of the Swiss membership package. So each of the members get, I believe it's 10 licenses of availability. OSRL and Clarksons will provide all training and support throughout for the users. Did that answer the question, Mario? Or did I?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose what they're asking is, can we just access it, or do we need to be as part of the package? It comes with the capping package, I suppose, as I stated at the front end of the presentation. So I think that sort of answers the question. If you're subscribed to the capping, you get access to the software, and you've got access to it any day, any time of the week, 24/7.
Exactly, and I think, Paul, like we have discussed on many occasions before, in a real event, the user licenses and availability and access into this will doors will be opened up for further people if required, for example.
Right, thanks, Chris. Next question. Great new features. Tilly mentioned an uptick in APAC. Is availability globally generally getting tighter? Tilly?
I think that Paul might be better at that one, because
Paul?
I'm honestly only looking at APAC.
Sure.
Okay.
So we have subsea teams in Houston, Aberdeen, Oslo, and in Singapore, where Tilly works. And I think it's fair to say that construction support vessels are getting significantly tighter in terms of their availability in 21 versus 20, basically because there was a lot of IRM work that was postponed on the back of COVID, and a lot of that work is getting done now. There are, as an example, some sub-segments of the subsea market in terms of supply completely sold out in May and June in the North Sea, for example. So in general, I think it's fair to say that the subsea market is tightening a bit. I would ask, though, whoever posed that question, or anyone else that's interested in a more detailed answer, to shoot me an email, and I'll get back to you with a detailed answer if I understand the context of the question a little bit more, and that might be a bit more helpful.
Thanks, Paul. There's another question here around safety cases for Australia. So I'm not sure who would answer this, and part of it probably sits with me as well. If a vessel does not have a safety case for Australia, how long should be allowed to get one? So what's the time frame? And I think that could vary depending on the activity that's been undertaken, and if it doesn't have a pre-existing safety case at all, it will take some time to develop one. If it's got an existing safety case, then obviously that will have to be modified to submit to the regulator based on the activity. So there's no real clear-cut answer there, and then the regulator will take some time to actually undertake the assessment, and that's dependent on how long the regulator can take, I suppose. That they'll obviously work as hard as they can. Anyone else got anything they want to add to that, Paul?
No, Mary,
Answer that adequately.
In the exercises that we've participated in, that is typically the answer that we've come across. Yeah.
Thank you. The last question I've got here at the moment is, can you prepare the sea response report or document for specific locations and projects, including authorization and communication flow process, mutual aid agreement. This will help speed up the process of response, and we know who's accountable and responsible. So can we prepare the sea response document, or I suppose the software, for specific locations and projects, including authorization, communication flow process, mutual aid agreement, to help speed up the response? I suppose from my perspective, I can have a go at that first, and then maybe you guys can supplement my answer. So, you know, some of these things are done outside of the software. So we're talking about your source control emergency response plan should have a lot of the detail about who's doing what, when and why, and your standard emergency response plans. That, you know, that will talk about communication flows. It'll talk about mutual aid agreements. From the software perspective, Paul, is there anything that you want to add in there and what it can do to help?
Well, yes,
the response?
Mary, one can pre-program in all of the wells that the subscriber might be concerned about, and then run reports off that. So there is that preparedness piece around the actual wells that the user is concerned about, and they can be shared internally. And there is also an instant messaging feature that comes with sea response that might help with planning, and that is auditable and recorded as well. But it's not interfaced with other systems, like you said, Mario, pertaining to the rest of the question that was posed.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So hopefully that helps that listener out there or viewer. If you've got you need any more information on that question, please don't hesitate to contact myself, and I'll be able to sort of help you with a little bit more detail if you need more information. The next question I have, actually, no, it's okay. It's just asking if there's a recording. Someone dialed in a bit late and asked if there's a recording being made so they can rewatch it. So yes, as I said at the start, there is a recording. It'll be available in a couple of weeks' time. So you'll have access to everything that we've gone through today. And I think that's one more question here. Would vessel mobilisation plans and times be included in an OSRL SCRP? I suppose vessel mobilisation times and types would be included in the response time model. So if we're developing a response time model for a SCRP, we would put the indicative timings in. Obviously, come the day, hopefully there's never an incident, but if there were to be an incident on the day, those timings would have to be rechecked, and that's where sort of we would, or the well owner or the operator would then go back to Clarksons and ascertain which vessels are available at the time, utilising the software. Can they be put on charter for the response, and then the timings would be worked out from that. Paul, is that an accurate reflection to answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely, Mario.
Okay. I suppose the other thing I wanted to add here is that I am working with a group here in Australia to develop up a generic response time model for OSRL OIE, or capping OIE, CERT, so Subsea Incident Response Toolkit, offset installation equipment, and the capping stacks for this region. So there are a few people that are involved that are probably watching this webinar. If you want to know more about that, please, once again, contact me and I can certainly provide you with some information on that. So I think that is the last. Yeah, that's the last of the questions. So once again, I think everyone online watching the webinar, thank you. And also a big thank you to the presenters. So Chris from OSRL, Paul from Clarksons, Colin from Maritech, and Tilly from Clarksons Plateau. Thank you for your time in pulling together this presentation and delivering it to the people online. Really appreciate it. Like I said, a recording will be available on the website Technical Library in a couple of weeks, so you can access it and watch this at your leisure. Please feel free to contact myself, as I said, and